Everyone feels and sees the division in our culture on the issue of abortion. It seems that almost every news cycle highlights yet another extreme push for abortion on demand. Have you read these headlines in the news lately? President Trump gave Planned Parenthood two options: stop killing unborn babies and continue to receive Title X tax dollars. That's option number one. Or option number two, continue killing unborn babies and no longer receive Title X funding. We know as an abortion business which option they chose: to continue to kill children. How about this headline? Planned Parenthood vows to fight for abortions based solely on race, gender, and the potential of Down syndrome. Planned Parenthood admits in court that it sold body parts from aborted babies. This is just in the last week. And most recently, a presidential candidate says if he's elected, he wants American taxpayers to pay for abortions in poor countries around the world to limit population growth. Why? Because he claims mass abortions will limit climate change. As the evil of abortion continues to be exposed and more radical positions are embraced, St. Paul reminds us that where sin increased, grace abounds all the more. God is granting us many graces to engage in the spiritual battle in order to defend those who have no voice. As we know, God doesn't call the equipped, He equips the called. And that's why we're here today, to be equipped to defend life. And I believe our speaker will do just that. Father Corey Close has been a priest for 7 years for the Diocese of Davenport. He grew up in a northern Chicago suburb, then went to the University of Iowa for computer science. After he graduated, he went to seminary, joining the diocese here, and studied at Mundelein Seminary for 2 years, and then the North American College for 4 years. After he was ordained, he finished a degree at John Paul II Institute for Marriage and Family Studies in Washington, D.C., for which he acquired an STL degree. He has also received spiritual director training from the Institute for Priestly Formation and is an accredited spiritual director. Currently, he's the pastor of St. Bridget's in Victor and St. Patrick's in Brooklyn, Iowa. Please help me welcome Father Corey Close.
Good morning. Good morning. And I'm going to try to do the walking mic, but it doesn't work, but hopefully it works. Great. Well, it's good to be here this morning. And I guess I don't know where to start, but first and foremost, if you have questions or anything, feel free to raise your hand. I want this to be an opportunity for kind of discussion, if you will. And so I'll certainly talk a lot, but if you have questions and or things you want clarified, there's going to be a couple designated areas for kind of like question and answer session, so to speak. So obviously at the end, but kind of in the middle as well, because it's kind of like a two-part presentation, so to speak. The first half of the presentation is really like looking at kind of the background, the underpinnings of where we are, what the culture is, what the philosophy is, et cetera, et cetera. And then the second half is more kind of a point-by-point, different arguments, although there's 500 million arguments you can come up with for defending abortion, as you could with anything. So I've only listed as many as I could think of, but you, I'm sure, will have heard of arguments that I didn't list that will be helpful to address. So I guess that's the first thing, just feel free to ask questions if anything needs clarification. So don't, as I always like to say, there's no such thing as a stupid question, just stupid people. It's supposed to be a joke. But anyways, good. Well, why don't we just begin here? So the title of the presentation is Pro-Life Apologetics.
So we'll see how that goes.
Father Corey, just
Yeah, go ahead.
just to let everyone know,
Oh, yeah.
the PowerPoint presentation is in your folder, so if you'd like to follow along and make notes, you're encouraged to do that.
Yeah, we should probably start with a prayer. So when we start, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, Amen. Lord, we thank you and praise you for bringing us together this morning to reflect upon your love of life and your creation that is so good. We ask you to strengthen us, to empower us to defend your creation and its goodness, especially each human being which has been created in your image and likeness. We ask you to open our hearts to how we need to be converted and grow in our own lives so that we may share with others the consolation we have received and help them to know your goodness, your truth, and your love. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Okay.
So, welcome and thank you.
There we go. So, this morning we're going to go through a couple things, kind of just a little bit about me. Background, I kind of was just talking about this. Background of where we are, understanding the opposition. This is just kind of a brief overview. Understanding the arguments, and then a Q&A. So let's go to here. So, I guess I just wanted to start a little bit with my own story, just so you understand a little more where I'm coming from. So, maybe that's a harsh word to use, but I would say it's probably pretty accurate. So I grew up in the northern suburb of Chicago, and definitely to a Catholic home. We went to Mass every Sunday, so we were very faithful in that way. But when it came to the various moral teachings of the church, I would say I loved the church, but I loved the church as kind of like you might love your silly, out-of-touch grandfather. So I never hated the church or hated the church because of its teachings on contraception or abortion. I just kind of was like, just in the same way that who would hate their like loving grandfather? You just know that he's kind of silly and kind of wrong in the head, and you just kind of smile and nod, kind of a thing. So that was kind of my approach to Catholicism growing up. I loved the church, loved going to Mass, just knew, obviously, the church was wrong in contraception, abortion, etc. It was just obvious. But it didn't affect my faith or anything like that. So, now, I first heard the calling to the priesthood when I was in maybe 7th grade. Now, I went to public school my whole life until I went to seminary. And so, but anyways, so one day I was between classes in junior high and talking with a friend. And I don't remember what we were talking about, but I do remember the end of the conversation. He turned to me and he said, Father Corey, I think you would make a great, or not Father Corey, I'm sorry. He said, I just so you said that. He said, Corey, I think you would make a great priest. And it just struck me and really resonated and was like, okay, yeah, this is what I'm supposed to do with my life. And so, but then I struggled and wrestled with it for about 10 years. I greatly desired marriage, so that obviously was difficult to reconcile with the calling to the priesthood. I'll spare you all the gory details, but over 10 years I wrestled with it until finally I answered the call to the priesthood and went to seminary. Now, when you combine it with the thing I just talked about, when I went to seminary, I brought, if you will, a lot of baggage in the sense of that I knew that at the minimum, I didn't understand a lot of what the church's teachings were. And so when I went to seminary, my instinct was, if I'm going to really do this, I need to do this for real. And I need to learn what the church teaches and really understand it and try and wrestle with it. Now, there were other topics, but abortion was actually one that in my own life I was lucky. It took me about 5 minutes at that to be converted on it. Because the culture had taught me to not think about it, and that it really wasn't something that I had any say in or any thinking about. Like it was the culture is very, don't think about it. And so when I actually sat down and thought about it for about 5 minutes, luckily I didn't have any skin in the game. And that's one of the things I think we'll find, which is one of the reasons why it's almost entitled pro-life apologetics is almost, I know before we even started the talk, it's almost useless. Because usually people who are very pro-abort have skin in the game somehow. And so it's not a purely rational discussion of apologetics. So that right then there obviously complicates the issue significantly. But luckily for me, I didn't have any skin in the game. So when I thought about it, it's like, oh, wait a minute, it's a human life. You don't get to kill human life because it's inconvenient to you, period, in the sentence. So obviously, abortion was a very easy conversion for me. luckily. But, so I just wanted to kind of highlight the fact that I have been on both sides of the debate, I suppose. But for me, I mean, I'm sure you've encountered people who, I'll talk about them a little later. There are people who defend abortion, but they always put like a question mark at the end of any of their arguments, because they don't really believe what anything they're saying. They're the people that don't really have skin in the game. They've just been cowed into this position by the culture. And so those are the people really we're trying to help everyone, obviously, but they're the ones that pro-life apologetics can actually maybe affect. Which is a significant amount of people will see that. But so I was kind of one of those people where it wasn't like I was marching in the street, you know, like pro-abortion. It was just, that's what it is. You just accept it. And it is, and especially as a man, you have no say. It's not your issue. So as a priest, probably the most pro-life work I've done, if you want to kind of put it in a box, that's been very deeply meaningful to me is working with Rachel's Vineyard, which maybe you've heard of. There's also a bit of confusion. There's like Project Rachel, which is like a post-abortive phone calling service, kind of like call a counselor on the phone. Rachel's Vineyard is a little more, this is completely different, but the same topic. It's post-abortive ministry retreat. It was initially conceived by a Catholic, and now they kind of have a non-denominational version, but I've done 3 of them. They're very powerful, they're very amazing. Working with women and men who have struggled with abortion in their past to find healing. It's really no words can describe the power, seeing it in person, being a part of it, being there, witnessing it. I've done 3 of them. I'll be doing another one in October. There's a Bridgehaven Pregnancy Center out of Cedar Rapids, does a lot of great work. They had this retreat for the state of Iowa now, although now they call it Take Courage. So if you're looking for, if you want to look it up online, I think it's in your packet, but Bridgehaven Pregnancy Center does, like I said, it's called Take Courage. So just a very powerful experience from my own perspective. So in other words, seeing firsthand the devastation that abortion has wrought in these people's lives. Most of them are women, but also men. Seeing the devastation it's wrought in their life, seeing the hell that it put them through for 20, 30, 40 years, and then finally seeing the massive amount of grace and forgiveness that God pours into their life and brings them to a place of peace and healing, it really brings home how, on the personal level, how horrific this is, right? Obviously, it's horrific in many different ways, but kind of in that personal, this particular woman, right? Because it was her choice, right? It was her body, her choice, right? But to see how horrific of a choice it really is. And how, once you see that, how you don't want anyone else to have to go through that. So it's maybe, I don't know if this season, but my greater awakening, probably more dramatic than it needs to be. But the idea is just recently, and we're going to go into that, just how maybe you sensed it, I think we've all sensed it, something is really in the water right now regarding this issue. I think we'll get into that. So that's kind of the big bones of the first half of the talk. So, okay. So I think we're at a turning point in the discussion. I think that's undeniable. Now exactly where the turning is going, that's up for debate. That's kind of why we're here. But I think the turning point is undeniable because, so what I'm calling the unbeatable pro-choice position for the last 40 years, basically, was that abortion should be safe, legal, and rare. So it's kind of an impenetrable position. Basically what it's in a sense, at least from a colloquial kind of just day-to-day interacting with other people, if you're trying to win not so much the hearts and minds of the public, but just cow them into silence. This argument is very powerful in a, democracy as we are. So the idea is that basically, it has a couple problems with it. in the sense that it's admitting that abortion is an evil, right? And that's the key word rare there, right? So, of course, the idea was that abortion is happening, but it's happening in back alleys where women are being, butchered. And so let's make it legal. Let's stigmatize it in the sense that, let's create clinics around the country that give really good counseling to women, give them their options, give them good health care, give them the access to contraception, et cetera, so we can, but then in those rare times, so in other words, we do all of our groundwork to make abortion very rare, but when it does happen, we have a safe environment for it to occur in. It's pretty impossible, it's very difficult, I think, in a democracy to argue with that, if that was true. Obviously, probably all of us here know that everything I just said is a fantasy. I might as well just describe unicorns running around with dragons as, like the laws we just created. Because we know none of that happened, right? Planned Parenthood doesn't even pretend to give any services really other than abortion and contraception, which is just a gateway to abortion, as we all know. And so about the only thing they accomplished was the middle of legal, right? And it's not safe either, right? We know all of that, but what my point here is, from an apologetic standpoint, to understand the argument, that wasn't the argument they were making. But it's very important to note that that is not the argument they're making anymore. Oh, but just to note, this was kind of the classic cop-out, right? I'm personally against but, right? And we're a democracy, and we're a free society. People should have the ability to make choices with their lives, and who am I to stop them from making those choices, right? These were the arguments. And certainly the personally against but, if I remember correctly, it was made popular by the previous Cuomo mayor of New York in the 80s, the father of the two current Cuomos, who was a very prominent Catholic politician who coined, basically made this popular. I don't know if he coined it, but he made it popular as a way for Catholic politicians to kind of be like, well, yeah, my faith tells me to be against abortion, but I can't impose my faith on other people, right? So we'll get more into the specifics of that argument later. Right now, I'm just trying to describe what's going on. So I think, at least in this country, a major turning point was in the 2016 Democratic National Convention. There were a couple things they changed in their party platform. But one thing they changed for our discussion is they removed the word rare. Okay? So in the official Democratic Party, their document, like their official, this is what the Democratic Party stands for. They are for abortion that is safe and legal, period. Now, why would you take the word rare out? Well, the word rare implies that it's a conceit, right? Yes, ultimately abortion is evil. However, it is a necessary evil. That we hope to work to create a society and a situation where abortions don't need to happen, but we still need it as a backup. But taking the word rare out is implying that that is no longer the case. And if that was all that had happened, maybe my argument on this area would be weak. But when we look at the actual rhetoric that has come along with it, there's a reason they changed the word. There's a reason they took the word out. I think it was actually at this same Democratic National Convention that, I can't remember who it was. I think it might even be the woman who's in charge of Planned Parenthood. But anyway, there was someone who stood up and said, I had an abortion and got a standing ovation, right? And this is what we're seeing more and more. We're seeing what's happened was it's a shift that was instantiated into the Democratic National Convention document, right? Their party platform, but they're putting it into the platform was just simply
a acknowledging of the changing of the winds, if you will, that the pro-abort lobby has moved from at least pretending that it's or they arguing that it's a necessary evil to now it is actually a good, right? So abortion is a fundamental good. It is a fundamental human right. It is a basic thing. If you were on a stranded island and needed supplies, then what we've learned is you need food, water, and an abortion back. Right? I mean, basically, right? It's a fundamental, basic thing that humans need to survive and function, and it's a fundamentally good thing, and a thing to be celebrated, a thing to be rejoiced in. And this is not me just making up. This is not just me being rhetorical. I could probably give you 800 million examples of. There was this comedy show on Netflix. If you want a comedy, use the term extremely loosely. What was her name? I think it was like Michelle Wolf. I think is what it was. And she had a whole segment where it was like a marching band, and she was in like a kind of very patriotic. It was a very patriotic thing. The whole thing was a song and dance and a number about how amazing abortion is. Right? This is where we come to. So it's critical to understand, and I think that's where there's a big turning point, and we'll talk about the ramifications of this. But it's clear to me that the pro-abort lobby has moved from kind of the conceit that it's a necessary evil to it is an objective good, a good to be celebrated, a good to be rejoiced in, a good to be defended definitively. And anyone who questions that is not just a person in good conscience who's struggling with a necessary evil, but now is an evil person who's trying to take away an objective good. In the same way that if I wanted to enslave a part of the populace, right, obviously you would consider myself evil, you would consider me evil. And so it's the same kind of thing. I don't know. So this was early this year. I just put this here as just I guess an anecdote of how I think the change is happening. So probably many, if not all of you, are aware. Earlier this summer, there was an actual representative, right, for this state of Pennsylvania, who in his district of Philly. So I've actually walked by that Planned Parenthood in Philly many times because my brother lives a few blocks away from it. And so he went to that Planned Parenthood and harassed a few people. Just like one was just like an older woman, and then another time it was a couple like 15-year-old girls with their mother. But they were all women, and he was just harassing them very aggressively, very uncharitably, let's say, about the fact that they were praying silently in front of Planned Parenthood and attacking their character, saying that what they were doing was actually not Christian. Right? So in other words, a Christian thing to do would be to support women having abortions. Right? And this all makes sense when you understand what I just talked about, right? That abortion is moved from from a necessary evil to an objective good. And so this growing aggression on parts of the culture. I'm sure we've seen many videos of pro-life people being actually physically beaten, right, at various pro-life places, or when they were praying in front of abortion clinics or whatever. And so Brian Sims is just kind of was a bit of a point that actually made the news, but this things we're seeing more and more kind of an aggressive response to pro-lifers, more and more violent response. I think 10, 20 years ago, what would have gotten at best a derisive laugh is now getting a beating. And that's kind of, I can't remember the exact quote, but it was like Gandhi, I think it was Gandhi who said, like, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they then they attack you, and then you win, or something like that, right? So I think there's kind of like a stage where at first they just, at best, derisively laugh, but then they get to a stage where they don't derisively laugh anymore. They go and they beat you up. And that's kind of where we are right now, right? We're transitioning. And it's very, on a grander political scale, political violence is becoming far more common with groups like Antifa and things like that. So, so the point is we're starting to see more of an aggressive, which, also, but you notice how it's, if you're defending a necessary evil, you're not going to be as motivated to go, like, beat up an evil person, right? Because in the end, they can't be evil if they're opposing even a necessary evil. But now that it's an objective good, and they're attacking that objective good, you need to stop them, right? And maybe beating them up is the best solution. At least that's what they would say, right? That's what they would think. So anyway, so in response to that, though, we had a huge pro-life rally at that abortion clinic in response to all of this. And I think that's a sign that also the pro-life movement has gone through a shift. In the sense of, I think we are growing in strength and growing in conviction. And certainly in the culture, we sense that something is happening regarding this issue, right? And so both sides are getting more ramped up. So that's why one of the reasons that I'm here today is to, in whatever small way I can, arm you in this upcoming fight, I guess, that we have. But obviously we've been fighting for years, but it's ramping up. So that's kind of where we are now. Okay, so this is very, 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 very rough. Take what I'm saying here with a grain of salt. I don't have like, I could have, but this is basically, this is a good, I don't know, rule of thumb, I feel, for America. And I'm sure most polling basically, to some degree backs this up. But generally speaking, about 1 out of 5, so about 20% of people are hard pro-abort, right? These are the people that would even go so far as to say it's a good, it's an objective good, it needs to be defended, it's your right, blah, blah, blah. And then 20% roughly are hard pro-life, which is presumably us sitting here today, right? But so a lot of people, though, are roughly, again, this is all ballpark, but just to get the idea, that about 60% of the country are what I maybe would call soft pro-abort. So these are people that want what you might call common sense restriction of abortions. So, for example, maybe first trimester, maybe that, they're okay with things like waiting periods, and that they actually assume that the woman is being given the options, right? They don't understand that it's, oh, you're pregnant? Okay, well, let's set up your date for your abortion, right? They don't understand that there's no actual, well, what about or adoption? What about keeping the kid, or blah, 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 right? But so generally speaking, most of these people are kind of a soft pro-abort, and if you were to ask them, this is kind of where I was once upon a time, but if you were to ask them, they would give abortion defenses, but they almost always, like, you can hear it in their voice, they have like a question mark at the end. They don't even really, like, well, isn't it a woman's choice? Like, isn't it their body? Like, they haven't thought through the issue. So they are people who apologetics are actually very helpful with. Really, the pro-abort, the hard pro-abort people, you could give a million brilliant, I don't know, half the pregnancy, or it has to be first or second trimester, or whatever. So like most countries on the planet have significantly better laws than we do when it comes to abortion. So these all kind of just, this is a lot of what I was talking about. Generally speaking, those who are pro-abort have some skin in the game. Maybe they've had an abortion in the past. Maybe they've helped people get an abortion. We'll talk about the philosophy undergirding this, because being pro-abort it makes perfect sense under a certain philosophical system, which is very powerful in our current day and age. So they also have kind of skin in the game in that. We'll talk about that. They're usually they're hurting, very angry. Generally, when they're not really trying to convince you, they're trying to convince themselves. So an argument with them is not really easy to affect with people. It's kind of like the apostles went out and could cast out demons, but then there were some demons they couldn't cast out. And they went to Jesus and they're like, why couldn't we cast these demons out? And he's like, well, those you can only do with prayer. So I kind of wonder if that's kind of like, in a sense, where these types of people, we really just need to pray for them. Apologetics with them is probably just talking to a wall. I mean, maybe you're planting a seed, but they're in such a place of anger and hurt and emotion that it's not, and they're really just convincing themselves. They don't care about you so much. Like I said, they shout slogans. They're not interested in debate or argumentation. They're not thinking about this rationally. They do some classic fallacies. We'll talk about this more later. They straw man and demonize their opposition. So the one big thing nowadays is this handmaid's tale nonsense, right? That basically anybody who's pro-life really wants to make women, like in The Handmaid's Tale, which I haven't seen, but basically women are sex slaves of powerful men, and women have absolutely no freedom or whatever. And so, which obviously is ridiculous. We're trying to save babies from being murdered, right? But they need their opposition to look like monsters. It's a classic tactic, right? So you straw man your opposition, which I don't know how familiar you guys are with apologetics, but straw manning basically is where if I'm in an argument with you, I don't want to deal with your real argument, so I turn your position into a straw man. Basically, I turn your position into something totally ridiculous, which isn't even remarkable, which doesn't reflect your position at all. But I turn your position so ridiculous that then it's easy to defeat, right? Like if I were to have a fight with a straw man, I would win, right? That's the idea. And politicians do this all the time. Our culture does this all the time. We'll talk more about it later, but very common. So I kind of talked about these guys a lot already. So like I said, most of America generally want what would be considered pretty strict restrictions on abortion. You can actually see this in a few places, like for example in Alabama, where they made those really strict abortion restrictions. But it was in their House, it was like 25-4-3 against. Right? It was a landslide to vote for these very strict abortion restrictions. And those people had been voted into office, right? So there are places where if the democratic process were to function, that's the problem with Roe v. Wade, was even from a neutral legal perspective, it completely derailed the more natural, organic democratic process. If we had a functional democratic process regarding abortion, we would be in a way better place right now. Like New York and California would have, abortion, but most places would have very strict. Okay, so this is where we get into the meat of the philosophy. So, get ready for this, I guess. So, why is pro-life apologetics so hard? So some of it we've already touched on, right? Like, people have skin in the game, gotten an abortion, blah, 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 blah. But what I want to talk about now is the philosophy. And this is the philosophy, and this is the probably the most difficult thing. This is the philosophy that we all live in. We were born in it, okay? So we go to church and we've grown in our faith, and that's all great. But if we're honest with ourselves, we have all been infected with a disease, okay? Now every culture has this, but different cultures, the disease is different. Our culture, you can call it many different things. Some people call it modernism, some people call it liberalism, some people call it other things. So I'm going to do my best to describe the disease, and it's important for us to recognize that we are all infected to some degree. Okay? If you look at what we believe today, even as trying to be faithful Catholics, and compare it to the apostles, the church fathers, the medieval fathers, they would not be very keen on some of the things that we say and do today as a modern church. And so, because we've all been infected with this disease and we're blind to it, we don't know. So, so again, there's a million different ways to go about this and describe it. I'm just trying my best. So, I don't know. One of the ways I kind of see it in our modern day is, I don't know, there's different ways to call it. Here I wrote atheistic hedonism. I'll describe that in a minute. But before we go into that, let's pause for a second. I wonder if I have it in the next one. Anyways, so I don't know if you've heard this or seen this, but there was someone who did a study of modern religion, and not so much modern religion, but what the person on the ground believes. And what they found was remarkable was that everyone basically believes the same thing, whether you're a Jew, Catholic, Christian, well, not Catholic, Christian, or whatever, or an agnostic. It doesn't matter. It does not matter. Whether you go to church or not, it doesn't matter. Everyone believes the same thing. We have a universal religion that we all agree on. And he called it moralistic, therapeutic deism. Okay? And I think I have a slide on it, but I want to touch on this first, actually. So, because I think this is so helpful. So moralistic, therapeutic deism. Okay, so moralistic is the idea that we should be good, but it's a very, very vague idea. You're just supposed to be a good person. You should be nice. Actually, maybe you've seen stuff where it says like, I saw one of those, you can go to Walmart and get those like motivational things. And one of them I saw in someone's house was, in a world where you can be many things, be nice. Right? And made me want to vomit for one thing, but it's that's that moralistic piece. Just be nice. Okay, the way I describe it is, just don't go and murder someone. Okay, don't kick your dog. Okay, and as long as you don't do those things, then you're fine. You're a good person, right? Don't kick your dog. Don't murder someone. That's about it. Right? Be nice. Be a nice person. So it's a very, very, very low bar, but it's just kind of be nice. Therapeutic. So the fundamental purpose of religion and spirituality is to make you feel good. Okay? That one's pretty self-explanatory. And then deism is the idea that there is a God, but he's a distant God that has no real day-to-day impact on my life. So he loves me, but in kind of this vague, distant sense. So that's what the modern belief is. Now, all of this is in support of a philosophy, which, to use a big term here, is called freedom of indifference. Okay, it's a big, maybe you've heard of it, maybe you haven't. But basically, one of the fundamental questions of human life is what is freedom? We all know of freedom. In the sense that we all have that concept, right, of freedom and slavery. But what is freedom? And that's actually a big philosophical question. And there's different answers to that question. And there's really two fundamental answers. There's probably more, but the two I want to talk about is, well, the main one I want to talk about is freedom of indifference. But in the apostles, the early church, the medieval fathers, their vision of freedom was that you had the freedom to, what sometimes people call freedom of excellence, freedom for excellence. So the idea was that, yes, you have the freedom to do this or do that, but that, who cares? Like, that's meaningless. What we really want is this the better choice? And so ethics, for the first I don't know, 1,500 years of the church and philosophy before that was about making the right choice. Yeah, fine. You can eat this or eat that. You can do this or do that. But which one's the right choice? And that's what ethics is all about. But what we see in the last 750 years is a shift to what's called freedom of indifference. Okay? Now, in freedom of indifference, freedom is that I can choose this or choose that, period. That's it. That's all freedom is. That I can do this or do that, period. We're done. And that's all freedom is. And so a lot of the talk about freedom, this is huge for the abortion debate, right? Because if freedom is meant to be used for the good, then it seems pretty clear that we shouldn't be killing babies with that freedom. But if freedom is merely the ability to choose, then the choices themselves they have to lose their meaning, right? Because the meaning itself would scream out, you should choose me, I am the better choice. So we need to divest all choices of meaning, right? And the other thing we need to do is divest, so that we're not really talking about like transgender stuff today, but there's a reason that we're moving in that direction. It's becoming more and more debate, because one of the biggest enemies of freedom of indifference is the things that we couldn't choose, right? I didn't choose to be a man. I didn't choose to have XY chromosomes in every cell of my body. And so if you're really a freedom of indifference person and bringing it to the extreme, which is where we are today, it's really this philosophical movement that's been going on for hundreds of years is reaching kind of its culmination, its end point, I think. If that's all true, then anything that gets in your way of just the fact that you can choose must be destroyed. So even like gender, the fact that you were born a man, or born a woman, or whatever. So that helps explain, so that when we bring it to the abortion debate, we see that abortion, if you believe in freedom of indifference, if you believe that your freedom is the ability to simply choose, right? And that's what they talk. It's her choice, right? A lot of their language is flown from the philosophy. Then it makes sense that you would actually philosophically defend abortion, especially when you think of what is the end point of abortion. It's to allow you to live sexually, ultimately, and relationally, however you want. You want to have, a marriage? Sure. You don't want marriage? You just want to have a bunch of relationships? Sure. You want to, you know what I mean? Like it opens you to the freedom of choosing A or B, period, right? When in the past, we were stuck, right? Like, especially before really accessible contraception and accessible abortion, you pretty much had to get married to be safe economically and to be safe sexually, right? So that you wouldn't be abandoned with a kid. You had a husband who, he had to stick with you legally. But we've opened up our society, right, to freedom of choices. So this eventually leads to what I kind of call colloquially sometimes atheistic hedonism as a solution to life. You could name it other things. I suppose you could name it agnostic hedonism. Because normally most of these people accept that there is a God, but their vision of God is so pathetic that it almost might as well just be atheist, right? He's so distant and meaningless. But so, like I said, so there's really no God, no real God, or at least he has no meaningful impact in my life. So maybe deism might be a better term here. I'm ultimately alone in the world. The only thing I can do to kill the pain of my existence is to have as much pleasure as I can until I finally die. That's basically the philosophical vision I think of our culture. So however you want to name this ideology that I've just been describing for the last 10, 15 minutes. One interesting thing is that second point, this ideology believes that everyone thinks as they do, but strangely come to different conclusions. We see this everywhere, okay? So St. Paul actually talks about this. So he says that the person of the flesh cannot judge the person of the spirit, but the person of the spirit can judge both the person of the flesh and the spirit. And what we find is when people are living in the flesh, in using St. Paul's terms, in the sense of they're living in this false ideology, they cannot conceive that other people actually think differently than they do. They believe that their belief system is what everybody follows. So there's a million examples. I put a couple there in mind. Another good one was, so for example, when gay marriage was legalized with the Oberfeld case, in Justice Kennedy, he wasn't the only one who did this, but he wrote the majority opinion. And he said that the only reason that anyone could be opposed to gay marriage is irrational animus. Okay? So in other words, the only reason you can oppose gay marriage is because you are irrationally angry. You have an irrational animus, an irrational hatred. In other words, you have homophobia, right? That's the only reason. So any other argument you make about the good of marriage, about the good of the spouses, about the good of the children, about sexual complementarity, blah, 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 is at most a smokescreen for your own personal hatred. And so we see this everywhere. And then, but notice, so the whole ideology is everything we're doing all the time is purely just because it's the most pleasurable thing to us at that moment. And when you hate someone, it is pleasurable to hurt them. And so if you want to hurt gay people, if you want to hurt, women who are struggling with a pregnancy, then you become pro-life or you become pro-marriage. So you create these cute little terms, but it's really hatred. I've seen more than one article recently that says the reason we're all here today is because we're all white supremacists. Okay? I'm sure you've seen those, right? But this makes sense if it's like, because the thing is, and so part of it is, I'm sure, just, straw manning and just knowing lies and all of that. But if we put that all aside and treat it on a kind of an honest philosophical level, it makes sense. We're having people who are living purely on a day-to-day, pleasure-by-pleasure basis, and they don't understand that other people don't live that way. And so they're trying to wrap their minds. Because here's the thing. I remember I saw one, it was a late-night comedian, which they're not really funny people, right? And he asked this question. He was almost begging, like, why do you care about, he was just screaming. He just couldn't. Why do you care about someone else? Was ultimately what he was saying. You're just like me. All you care about is yourself. So why are you so concerned with this woman who gets an abortion? Who cares? You live your own life, get your own pleasure. Kill your brain cells until you die. Let her do her thing. Like, the idea that you actually care for another human being that isn't yourself is inconceivable to them, right? So that's part of what's going on here, I think, as well.
Father Corey,
Yeah.
you said that we could interject.
Yeah.
Right there on that, this is incredible what you're saying, because it's part of what I have not conceived of it in this way, but I see exactly what you're saying. So why do we say that when it comes to why do you care, and I forgot my point on that specific thing, but they're attacking that because they don't understand how we think. How did we get to this fast? Today, I mean, you're saying it started over a long period of time, but it seems to me like it's really ramped up just recently.
It has ramped up, but it is there have been whole books written about how this developed in the late Middle Ages and how it's eventually, all sin functions kind of the same way. The first hit is free, if you will. Like, you can sin for a long time and it can work, but eventually, there's a reason that, you need, just look at any addiction. You need more and more of a hit to make it work. And so the same is true with kind of evil in general. That, because the problem is, if I do evil to satisfy myself, it doesn't satisfy. And so our instinct always is, well, that's because I didn't crank it up enough. So I think that happens on the personal level, it also happens at the societal level. So we're kind of at a point now where society as a whole, I mean, we really, for the whole 20th century, society has struggled with where to go. We've been in a crisis basically since World War I, since the end of World War I. Because with the end of World War I, right, society up until World War I was very, very confident. The West was totally self-confident. And then it had this horrendously destructive conflict that was for like no purpose. And ever since then, we've been like struggling. What is the purpose? Like we were kind of this, Christian society that was, spreading its, the goodness to the world and all of these things. And obviously these things are more complicated, but that's how they felt about it. World War I very much shocked us. And so the whole 20th century, really, the last 100 years, has been a struggle for what is the purpose? Why are we here? And because what was before must have been wrong, because it led to World War I. And so we've seen this in, like, for example, the rise of communism, the rise of Nazism, right? National Socialism, which ultimately, obviously, was basically defeated in World War II. But World War II, in many ways, was a war of different ideologies struggling for meaning, in a sense, right? And National Socialism gave a version of meaning, and communism gave a version of meaning. So yeah, I mean, when we think about it in the broad scope of things, we're in a time period that is really, really, really struggling for meaning. There really is no meaning to life, and that can't satisfy for very long. So I think that's why now we're getting to more violence in our, but there's been horrible violence in the whole 20th century, right? So it's a huge, deep topic. We could probably talk for a million years, but that's a good question. Well,
Thank you.
Sorry, it's such a huge topic, but okay. So the next thing I wanted to say is this is this is my own term. I see this every single day in the news, in the church. It's what I call misplaced mercy. But you can call it many different things. Relativism, liberal, whatever the heck you want to call it. But modernism. But so the idea of misplaced mercy is that truth and charity have been separated. There really is no truth anymore. And so we've discarded truth in favor of charity. Right? We're supposed to be kind, we're supposed to be loving, we're supposed to be caring. Well, St. Paul says, what father is there that does not discipline their son? And he says there is a time, a bastard father, a bastard son. So basically what we have been taught to do, even in the church I think, we've been taught to be bastard parents. Right? That pat their kids on the head, but never discipline them. That there's no rules, there's no law. But children, there's this one study they did, or experiment, I guess it was really an experiment. They had two playgrounds, one that had a fence and one that didn't. And they put kids into this new environment. And where the fence wasn't, where the fence was, the children explored the entire area up until the fence, climbing the fence, like just having fun in the whole area. In the area where there wasn't a fence, the kids were scared and kind of huddled in the middle. Right? There's a reason that, in just a few minutes, the Iowa football game is going to start. There's a reason that it's a good thing that there's an edge of the field. And when you go off of it, you're whistled. Right? That allows the game to happen. Right? Every game ever has boundaries. These are the rules, this is how it goes. Right? And that's what makes the game work, and that's what makes the game fun. Right? And the same is true of life. Life has rules, it has boundaries. And when we're within those boundaries, we flourish. When we're outside of those boundaries, if there aren't boundaries, we get confused and scared. But so really, our modern day is kind of like, there really shouldn't be boundaries, freedom of indifference. And so in the end, if someone chose a different choice than you, remember, choices have no value, they have no inherent value. So you should be merciful. And when I've seen a lot of people, I'm not going to name names, but I feel when they use the word mercy, they don't mean mercy. See, mercy implies what they did was wrong, but we're going to be merciful. But when I think a lot of people use the word mercy, they don't mean what they did was wrong. They mean, hey, they made a different pleasurable choice than you did. Who are you to judge them? Right? But it's like, well, no, there is truth. And you discipline your child because you love them. You create rules for your children because you love them, right? Just as St. Paul said, what father is there who doesn't discipline their children? God does it to us because he loves us and he wants us to grow and flourish. So, anyways, so I think that's a big issue with the abortion debate too, right? So, but anyways. Why don't we've been doing some heavy philosophical thinking. Why don't we take a quick 5-minute, grab drinks, go to the restroom. It's 10:34, so 10:40, we'll start up again. So if you need to go to the restroom, just take a break.